Again, I am not a linguistic major. So first I want to, as we usually do in the campus colloquiums, is to talk a little bit about ourselves. So I am from Puerto Rico, and we are very proud of our Spanish, but also our Taino, that are the Native Americans, and our African heritage as well. And it's basically embedded in everything that we do in Puerto Rico, from our music, our food, and the way that we talk, obviously. So in terms of our academic project, work, I first did my bachelor degree when I was in the University of Puerto Rico at the Rio Piedras campus. I did a double major in biology, but also in art history. Then I went to work in different experiences or initiatives that were related to education of young women in Puerto Rico, but also in the Dominican Republic. Most of them were training in different hospitality industry. And then I went, after that hiatus, I went back to Puerto Rico to the university to do my PhD in neuroscience and neurophysiology. And I traveled often in that occasion to Kentucky because our collaborator was there. And then after finishing my PhD, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, where I did my postdoc, in one first in pain and the other one in neuroimmunology. And precisely it was in WashU that I first encountered the topic of linguistic profiling. First, WashU, I went there to St. Louis, as many of us, because of the science and the opportunity of doing research in a top university, both in neuroscience, but also in immunology. And I eventually kind of got very immersed in the Washington University Postdoctoral Society as well. So it was a great opportunity for meeting people, not only in my discipline, but also in other areas of research throughout the campus. The medical campus spread is enormous, spread about 12 blocks in St. Louis area. So I was very excited when I went there for my interview, and I eventually joined Washington University for my postdoc. However, I was not aware until I moved there that St. Louis is a highly segregated city. It's actually done like that as many other places in the US by design, unfortunately. And even young children know about the Derma divide in St. Louis. Even they ask people that they first met in what school do they go? Where did they go to their high school? Because they know if it's going to be North Delmar, it was a Black community. And if it's South Delmar, it's going to be a mostly white community. This Delmar divide is not only in the city of St. Louis, it's spread all around the county of St. Louis, and basically like 1/3 of the population is north to the Delmar divide and 2/3 south of the Delmar divide. So, and I was actually living in a place that it was a high community, white community. 90% of the people living where I was living back then were white people. So yeah, so obviously I did notice that my accent was sometimes even considered a threat by many people. But it was not until I saw a presentation from Dr. John Baugh. He's a linguistic professor at Washington University, but he actually did his training at Stanford, that I learned the concept of linguistic profiling. So I think that the best way to talk about linguistic profiling is by looking at well, if I am able to put the video that is here, let me see. Oh, sorry. I cannot see the arrow for the video, but let me see if I can go back. I don't see the arrow for the video. Anyway, so basically linguistic profiling is the auditory equivalent of visual profiling. I cannot, for whatever reasons, put the video to run, but it's basically a person doing a phone call to look for an apartment, and when he's using a Black voice or a Chicano voice, he's not being considered. They tell him that that the apartment is already leased. But when he used a white voice, then he was accepted as a prospective tenant. And that was the experience actually from Dr. Baugh when he went to Stanford to do his doctoral training there. He called many places, and that was what he experienced. When he showed up to look for the apartment, it wasn't they discovered that he was Black. And in many occasions they told him, yeah, we are going to reconsider about this. So he decided to do his research about that particular topic. He saw that as an opportunity to do research in this area that had not been explored before. And he was the one who coined the term linguistic profiling. Basically, how people could discriminate by auditory cues about someone. You can see, there's something that has been used widely in terms of the housing industry. There are liability issues when you discriminate for a tenant just based on their race. But now they're also using the auditory cue as part of the profiling in order to accept or not a tenant. So he also goes to say that linguistic profiling is not only exclusive of the United States, so it happens in many other countries as well. And he also goes to mention that for a naive listener could accurately identify the ethnicity of the person that is talking just by the speech. And sometimes it's very little what you need to hear from someone. You don't need to listen to a whole presentation or a whole dissertation. Just by a hello is sometimes enough or sufficient for a listener to accurately identify the ethnicity of the speaker. And that now comes to another particular issue. What is the concept of stigmatized accents? And that goes based on the standard language ideology that it was something coined by Rosina Lippi-Green in his writings in 1994 and beyond. And basically it's the idea that, people that have a more homogeneous spoken language want to impose that way of speech to other groups. They have kind of the idealized way of speech, and then accents are become something that is what the other way of speaking. How others speak is now the accent. They basically don't recognize that they have their own accent themselves. Only the alien is the one that has an accent. Here in the United States, we have heard many times sometimes the phrase of like in Rome, like the Romans, right? But here in the United States, we hear often, especially from some people, that we need to speak American. But in answer to that, we need to consider that first, American is not a language. Also that the United States doesn't have an official language. Some states do have English as their official language in their either constitution or House bills, but United States doesn't have an official language. And interestingly, there is an atlas of North American English, and they say that there are about 9 cultural and ethnic American English dialects, 23 regional and local, and there are 4 American English-based hybrid languages. When I read that, I discovered in that moment that I actually speak 3 languages, because according to this atlas, Spanglish is an American English-based hybrid language. So now I know that I speak 3 languages instead of only 2. And also there are even some that are even extinct or near extinct. And then going back to what is to speak American, here in this map, the states that are in dark blue are the ones that English is their official language, including California. The ones that are in gray have no official language. And the ones that are in periwinkle are the ones that have English plus another language. Interestingly, where Sarah Palin was a governor, Alaska, they have not only English, but also 20 other Native Alaskan languages as their official languages of the state. In Hawaii, they also have Hawaiian as their as a state official language. In South Dakota, just recently in 2019, I will be here, they also included as official language the Ossetic Sahokin that and has three dialects, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And even in New Mexico, since their inclusion in the United States and in the statehood proclamation, they also included Spanish at that point as their official language, and French in Louisiana has a special status since 1845. So, so then why is that speaking American is only to speak with the standard American English, even when there are 32 different dialects in American English? So going back to the different studies done specific about linguistic profiling in the United States, this is a major problem in terms of discrimination. If we see as an example, African Americans that could be identified as Black because of their way of their speech, they have less salary, up to 20%, than the ones that could talk white, as we say. People that are bilingual, sometimes even when they're hired for being bilingual, they also have discrimination if they speak their other language at their workplace. And more interestingly, and this has a lot of impact for us in academia, is that people could, in the United States, assume that a speaker that uses a British, German, or French accent is immediately they assume that is more intelligent, have more education, better socioeconomic status, than someone that speaks with African American vernacular English or Ave, Chicano, or Puerto Rican accents. And if that sounds like exaggerated, we just need to go to see Inventing Anna in Netflix or The Dropout in Hulu to notice that using a fake baritone voice or a German accent ended up being suited their purpose to these two scammers when they were deceiving investors and defrauding banks and other institutions. So, you know, using just changing the voice could help or not someone. So in contrast, when this gentleman was using his African-American vernacular English at the lobby of a hotel, he was requested to abandon the hotel just because he was talking as Black. He was actually accused of being loitering at the hotel. And again, it shows, as he will put it in his Instagram, how racism is still alive and well. And in this particular article that I was reading just after the incident with George Floyd that has this tragic outcome, this linguistic professor mentioned that a term that I found it fascinating, that is linguistic hallucinations. You know, as white people sometimes feel the hallucination that a Black gentleman approaching them is a threat, as it happens the same day that of the incident with George Floyd. It was the Central Park bird watching incident in which this gentleman just wanted to let this lady know to leash her dog, and immediately she felt threatened and called the 911, saying that this person was attacking her and her dog. So she basically goes to the topic that the same way that someone could feel threatened just by the presence of an African American, the same goes when they hear their speech. You know, they hear someone talking Black and they immediately fear for the worst. And then she addressed that the problem isn't the speech itself, but the attitude with the interpreted speech. And to make it even worse, you know, we also know that linguistic profiling had been detrimental in court. In this particular case, that it goes to the star witness during the Zimmerman's trial, when after the assassination of Trayvon Martin, this particular professor in Stanford, he went at length looking at the different comments that were addressed about the star witness because the people could not understand her way of talking. I will not read out loud all the comments that they say. I will just let it be because they are so humiliating that someone could even talk about someone that way because they didn't like their Ave dialect or speech. So going back to what is to talk white, is the concept is now considered code switching that is used when people need to change their dialect, accent, or variety of language, depending on the social context that they are, in order to portray a different identity. We know that code switching, sometimes we use them for other reasons, not necessarily because we are afraid of discrimination. Just to put an example, every time that I will talk to my grandma, I will address her with a more respectful manner because she's my grandma. But the problem with code switching sometimes is that it has a toll. In this, I was recently watching this movie that deals with this situation of code switching, and with this police officer in Colorado Springs, he impersonated one person, and actually here you can see him talking with the Grand Wizard, David Duke, and he was able to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan because he was talking white on the phone. Well, what is code switching, and why do we say that it's costly? Well, because basically people of minority groups, they need to be, they are accepted provided that they behave in a specific way. In other words, instead of looking to praise their uniqueness, the cultural capital that they bring to their workplace, they're accepted if they're able to disguise themselves as white. That's basically the concept of code switching, or better say, the negative aspect of it. And again, going to this topic of code switching, in this particular tech talk by Chandra's Arthurs, that is a startup of an app, Friendish is the name of the app. She also addressed the issue that the cost sometimes could be immense for people of minority backgrounds, that they spend much more time worrying about their cultural compatibility rather than doing what truly matters. That is what they can bring to the workplace, what they can bring to the group that they're joining. And also, she addressed in her tech talk that it has consequences in terms of mental health and well-being. But then that's in terms of, in general, linguistic profiling and code switching. But now, what does happen in academia? Do we experience the same or not? Well, if we go back first before coming to college, students need to go through K-12. So there's significant research being done about linguistic profiling in the context of education from, either grade school or high school. In this particular article from a professor in the School of Law, he says that he was looking at different records, in many instances, even things that went to the court. He says that there was a study in which white teachers were rating as inferior the answers of Black students, even when the content was similar or identical to the one that was provided by white students. Also, in another study, he pointed out that when students were having an Asian accent, they were considered less competent, intellectually speaking. Similarly, another study that he pointed out in his article was that for teachers, when they were looking at how smart a student is, or what was the expectation of that particular student, if they were Chicano or Puerto Rican, the less accent that they are, the more successful or smarter they were considered by their teachers. And lastly, that Arab accented students were also ranked lower in terms of being warm or friendly by their teachers, just because of their accent. So this is in terms of K-12, but what happens when people go to college. Yeah, so going back to the experience of John Baugh, he says that when he was taking a class, African Americans and Puerto Ricans were getting D's and F in all the public speaking presentations, while the white, working class white students were having B's and C's. So he was able to have linguistic dexterity, and he was able to get an A in his presentations. And that actually was telling for him that he wanted to continue studying linguistics instead of continuing in accounting. And then this other article I found is now looking at the perspective of the students in college. This is for the other side of the pond. This is from the United Kingdom. And it was an article quite interesting about what is the impact of accent bullying in UK, especially for people that are coming from communities that are not, usually more like working families instead of families of privilege. And what they found was something similar to it had been found here in the United States, that students feel first that they don't belong. These are just quotes from different interviews that they did to different students. Others, they said that they were constantly suffering from being disapproved by students and staff in the universities because of their accent. Others suffered that the people were incredulous that they were able to be the top in the class just because of their accent, because they were having a working class accent. And this particular student, when she was in the moment of this interview, she was now in graduate school, and she even said that it took her more than a decade to go back to the university to pursue graduate education, because she cannot put herself together after her bad experience during her college years. Then we have also the other comments that were in the same article, that the people that were receiving comments like, we don't get your type here, you should try to fit in. Students that were in total fear about talking in class because they were afraid of being judged by their classmates, feeling of ridicule or judgment. Others that they said that it ruined their whole academic experience in college. So, do we want that for our students? Of course not. We don't want our students to feel ridiculed or judged. We don't want them to be afraid when they're in the classroom, that they are afraid to address us as faculty because we're going to judge them because of their accent or because they're going to be judged by their classmates. We don't want that in academia. So, as many of us here are from STEM disciplines, we need to do a postdoc in order to continue the pipeline in looking for an academic position. And some of these anecdotes, as an example, this happens to a friend of mine. When she went to do her postdoc at a major university in the East Coast, in Puerto Rico, it's very common to address everyone when you get into the elevator. You say always good morning and you greet everyone. So she was, within her first week of doing her postdoc, and that was what she heard from someone. Are you sure that you were hired as a postdoc? All Puerto Ricans I know are custodians. This happens to a friend of mine and myself in WashU, that in the 2 in the morning, we were moving mice from, they were in a facility, they were having MRIs. So it was very cold, so we didn't want to go outside. So we took the inner corridors at the university, and the security stopped us and they told us that we should be wearing our custodian uniforms because otherwise we were trespassing. And this happens to me, actually, when I mentioned to someone that I was going to the immunology conference to present there. And that's why that person, thinking that was helping me, told me, right? Why better somebody else in your lab give the talk, right? Because, because of your accent, the other researchers are not going to understand you. And now this is a young faculty member. Someone one day shared to me that he had this situation that he was going to a faculty meeting and someone thought that he was going there to fix a computer. He could not believe that he was a faculty member. Also, sometimes complaints that we get from senior faculty that students are going to not be happy with our accent in the classroom. And this particular comment I heard from somebody else, not at UC Davis, but that person mentioned to me that senior faculty were reluctant to promote this so-and-so to associate professor because they don't like her Colombian accent. So what was very troubling for me about this comment is that in this moment, they were not talking about that the students were evaluating her poorly in the performance as a professor, but the faculty was the one that were placing a judgment out of their accent, because they didn't like it. It is for me like, saying that I don't like how somebody else is dressed in yellow instead of a navy suit. So then I don't want her to be promoted. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because that should not be a reason to assume lack of competence. And then another article that was, landed in my hands recently about, reflecting about different anecdotes portrayed by different faculty here in the United States, either Latinx or also white foreign-born professors that some of them were also native English speakers, but not from the United States, so they were having a different accent. So it was interesting to read it because, even people that speak English as their first language, that sometimes could be discriminated in the United States because their accent is not the one that we consider standard American English or mainstream American English. So as an example, in this particular case, the person voiced that, when he came to the United States, he never assumed that differences in skin color or accent would be so significant. It ended up being, and how she had been suffering multiple microaggressions because of her Mexican and Latino accent. And this one is actually from someone that is white, but native English speaker, but not from the United States. And then she said that as soon, at the beginning, everything was fine until she opened her mouth. As soon as she used a different accent, she was considered less than the rest of her colleagues. Then also in that article, in this particular scenario, it's a little bit long, but basically the faculty member is mentioning that she was going to make a talk, and immediately someone in the audience said that you are stupid just because of the accent. And then she followed up on that, what makes you believe that? Well, because you have a Latino accent, so all Latinos are stupid, right? That's basically the presumption. This same person says that she also has similar comments in her evaluation from students, that students will say at the beginning that they thought that she was incompetent or stupid, but as soon as they, follow a little bit and let the course progress, they change their perception and consider now her as smart and expert in the field. And again, like other comments like that, surely I became evident that not being an English speaker will be a disadvantage. In general, I felt categorized due to how I look and I sound. So, and interestingly, this other one said, well, I speak multiple language, since I came to the United States, English with Spanish accent, Spanish with Peruvian accent, French with French accent, and then research with an expert accent. Yeah, so in this other article from the Eye Opener, that this is from Toronto, the article goes to say, like professors with accents have their jobs for a reason. In other words, professors have competence. So in that regard, basically the article put a little bit the context that students need to put a little bit more effort. Are teachers with accents too hard to understand, or are the students' personal biases the 1-inch barrier to learning? And I will be honest with you, I myself, when I started here at UC Davis, I was concerned about my accent after my previous experience also at Washington University, or better say with the community at large in St. Louis. And I went to the Center of Educational Effectiveness and I requested a consultation there to see how to work with my accent. And what they told me was quite refreshing, because it was in the line of what other experts had been talking about. That first, that universities should be thinking about what students might do to better understand their instructors. Or as this professor from UC San Diego says, that in today's global economy, we all need to be a bit flexible. In other words, we need to learn how to move with other people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, including different accents. And also, in this particular article, I like so much that it says, if you will be evaluating a professor as incompetent, if they were someone that would be a native speaker, a little bit like to be more honest about yourself in the way that you evaluate the faculty member. And this article for Nicolas Subtirello, I found it very refreshing, because it has basically two venues to consider. When he started this research, his hypothesis or rationale was consistent with standard language ideology, that non-native English speakers who teach in the United States will be subject always of students' complaints based on their students' language ideology. And that was, other publications in the past where basically that was their finding, right? But what he found was interesting, because he found that there are like two big bodies of ratings of professors in ratemyprofessor.com. He found some consistent with the language ideology that she can't speak English, the Asian instructor lack linguistic competence. In this particular case, he was rating professors that have a common American last name versus the ones that have a Korean or Chinese name. And he found that a big group of the raters were classifying their professors as lacking clarity or helpfulness when they are having Korean or Chinese names. But then what he also addressed is that students were responding to the very real difficulty that they experience in communicating with someone who is different from them. Something that was interesting from that kind of body of research in that article is that when he looked at the location of this rater and the gender of the professor, he found that, as an example, in universities that were in the West, the difference, the gap between how native English speakers were rated versus how professors that were Asian, either Korean or with Chinese names, the gap was much smaller when the rater was, the professor was a male, versus in the South, when the professor was a female, the gap was the widest. So in other words, this rating could be, it's like the intersectionality that Kimberly Crenshaw talks about, right? That here the professor is being judged because of her not being a native speaker, but also because of the gender. But also, he also found, in his discussion in that paper, he had like two big bodies, right? The ones that are consistent with the dominant language ideology, but also a big amount of the ratings were not consistent with the dominant language ideology. And all of those were, she does have an accent, but. So I just put just an examples of those ratings that you get to the accent quickly, that is easy at the end, that she will repeat when you ask, that is very helpful when you go to office hours, that, does have an accent, but it's not hard to understand, that the English is intelligible and she explains well, that in this particular case, the student was able to distinguish between the accent and the English, that the English was still perfect, and she had very good examples in class. And this is definitely my very favorite one. Yes, she does have an accent, but so does everyone else in Los Angeles, right? So in other words, we need to be open to differences because we're in a multicultural and also globalized environment. Then looking at other article that I found about accent as a bias and prejudice in academia. So in this particular professor said very clearly, that he had heard often that people tell him, you don't sound like a professor, or, that people cannot believe that he's actually having an academic position. And also that article goes a little bit at length talking about that is not only to promote diversity, that if we want to have a more inclusive environment, we need to actually change the narrative. It's not only to add more numbers, but how do we do with students, but also with faculty from diverse backgrounds. He also, this article also goes to the extent of saying that it's not only about educating about awareness of sensitivity, but we actually need to foster changing narrative to change, to help the social minority groups to feel welcome in academia, as well as initiating a dialogue and the necessary mechanisms that will open the path to a more meaningful progress. And that's precisely one of our attempts with this presentation. We need to start talking about these barriers that we have, not only for faculty, but also staff and students. And I also found very refreshing to find this column that was written by a student, not here at UC Davis, but in a different institution in Central Michigan University, and it was published last year. So this student is basically writing about something that she noticed at her institution, and is the mistreatment of professors based on their accent. And she's very clear, no, it's blatant racism. And also, she also says that in a broader scale, it reflects something that is unacceptable in the culture of her academic institution. And she says, if you can make the extra effort to work with an accented professor and your first instinct is to shame them or write a nasty review, then you are the problem, not the professor. And this is coming from a student, right? She also addressed the point that, yeah, she's in an institution this overwhelmingly white, and it's not the first time that comments like that have been come to light about people being mistreated on campus because of being from a different group. But she also says that if they are students, don't respect their professors based on their accent and their background, if that happen with faculty, what will happen then with the students? So if the qualified professionals are mistreated, what about the students of color in the same institution? And also going back to the article from Nicolas Subtirelu, he also mentions in an interview that he had after the publication of his article, was that what I think the student reveals is a need to address linguistic diversity at universities to find ways to help people accept and work across their differences. And I precisely wanted to put this map of UC Davis, global expansion, right? We have people doing research and collaboration in many, many places around the globe. So our net is quite broad. And California, we are in the state that is with highest diversity in the United States. So as university, we need to, look of ways of improving our way of accepting these cultural differences, accents being one of them. Especially because we want to create an impact locally, nationally, but also internationally. University of California and UC Davis in particular, we should be always a beacon of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that learning how to accept these differences of accent and how to work of them together, is part of that effort as well, especially considering that we are looking at multiculturalism and in a global society. And lastly, as this student that I quoted before mentioned, we are in a multicultural environment. If, we need to appreciate the uniqueness that everyone brings to UC Davis, students, staff, and faculty. Is part of being an Aggie and is part of being in the, in the university at large. So with that, I will finish sharing my screen and I will entertain any question that you may have.
So, sorry. Thank you so much, Lillian. I think that this is just a terrific talk. So happy finally to have somebody talking about this. I mean, the examples that you have given, I'm happy to hear this.
We're losing you, Veronica. We don't hear you. Veronica, we cannot hear you.
And just based on my experience, I had received so many micro and macro aggressions just due to my accent. I would like to share experience, a personal experience with you, just to put a face to this kind of aggressions and difficulties that we go through. So when I was a postdoc at UCSF, I started assisting a professor on neuroanatomy. Right now I teach neuroanatomy here. I am a professor of pathology. And the first day that I started the class, I said hello. And as soon as I say hello, they know that my language is Spanish, right? It's obvious. So there was a white girl in the first row, and she said, great, another person who cannot speak English. It's fine, it hurt me, I'm used to this kind of thing. So the surprise to me was when the next day the professor came and let me go. And she said, I'm sorry, but the students complain that you cannot speak. So I couldn't teach in the next 5 years, to the point that I was having anxiety attacks, just of thinking of teaching. And now it was super hard to me. And now when I teach, I really have a bad time. It's so nervous and so anxious. Doesn't happen to me giving talks, but teaching, yes. And it's because this huge macroaggression I received that by the student and by the professor. So I just want to share this thing with you, so you know that it's not just somebody that says something in a paper. It's like all of us, Black people and Hispanic people and any other kind of person with an accent that is not French or German, of course, suffers daily. And what I had to do to feel better is I went to accent modification therapy for 4 years. For no reason, because I speak the same, This is the extra time that after going to work as an assistant professor, every day I have to go to these accent modification classes. So this is just to give you an idea that it's just not a thing that it may bother you a little bit. It's really conditioning your life. It's conditioning your mental health. and people don't understand. And that's why when I saw that you knew about this topic, I said, Lillian, you need to put this talk together. You have done a terrific job. And if you don't mind, I would like you to keep giving this talk in departments and other institutions. I think that this is a change in the game of achieving, respect and equality for people with an accent. And I really appreciate what you're doing, Lilia. This is just an experience that I want to share with you. But also I want to ask you one question. Do you know if there is any literature studying the hiring process of professors with and without accent? Because I have the impression that when you interview, they directly think that you are not as smart, right? That you cannot do things. So if there is any study related to that topic, hiring of professors with accents?
Well, at least what I was looking at, the different references that I mentioned and other ones that I also read, but not necessarily quoted in the presentation. Most of the studies have been done with people that are already in the academic position, how they are either considered by their colleagues, but also by the students that they are teaching in the particular institutions that they are. In terms of hiring, I haven't seen like something published because obviously it also goes with the line of discrimination for hiring. So it will not be strictly academic. But at least those publications came after, probably the last decade or so about discrimination because of the way that people talk in academic settings.
Okay, more questions?
Feel free to unmute if you have a question. Typically for the campus colloquia, we stay until 4:30. We can have formal Q&A or just informal conversation. So feel free to just unmute and talk or add your question to the chat and one of us will read it.
So also I have lots of questions, so I'm gonna ask you questions just so we can start a conversation. So this thing of one thing that is interesting when I did my accent modification speech therapy, right? I wanted to get these services in UC Davis, but UC Davis don't have these services. So I went to Sac State. And this is interesting, because the Sac State offer this kind of accent modification classes, but UC Davis does not. And I think that is a thing that maybe we need to think about because it's a service for people with accents. But if there is any study, I know that there is not a lot of studies regarding, but you think that based on your knowledge and you have studied these accent modification therapies are useful for the professors? Or you think that you should be more bold and say, this is my accent, so pay attention when you're listening to me? What is your advice or your point of view?
In the one of the articles that I mentioned, the one about that they were interviewing different Latinx and also white people that are not native or non-native speakers. Some of them did mention that they went to accent, speech therapy or accent modification therapy. Some of them, they said that they looked for the information, but it was too expensive for them to afford. And they kind of came to the realization that, I can do it. I cannot take this particular class because it's too expensive for me. And but they've also always felt that they always have that kind of in their back of their mind that they're going to be judged because of not being able to put that extra effort in order to modify their speech.
Anna?
I have a question. I don't know for Lillian or for anybody. Has anyone looked at UC Davis data, teacher evaluations, to see if here there's also this bias and students are evaluating worse people that have accents?
I can speak about that. Like 5 or more, 6-7 years ago, I tried to do that study, and the IRB didn't approve the study. I tried to do an evaluation because I was getting comments like, "Oh, she's lovely, but she has such a strong accent."
I get that every time. So
The lovely thing is like, okay, since I'm a woman, you are double insulting me. I have an accent that is bad, and in addition, I'm not smart. I'm just lovely. Thank you very much. It's like just in one sentence. So I noticed, well, my husband teaches the same thing that me, so we compare the scorings. And he was saying, I don't understand. I get such a good score and you don't, but you know so much and explain so well. And I said, well, you are American. I'm not, So I said, I think that this needs to be a study because there is no reason why I'm getting these comments and these scores. So I was fighting with the IRB. I submitted several times. I contacted with the dean of, I think that was like the human resources, I don't remember, or the dean of academics, I don't remember the exact name. Anyway, we were not able to approve the IRB because they told me that even if they give me the scores from the professors, there was the number of professors minority in the medical school was so low, there was so few that I was gonna know who was this score for, so it was not gonna be blind because it was obvious who is who. I mean, there is 4 Latinos, 3 Blacks, so there you have it, and there wasn't power neither, the statistical power.
It just seems something that would matter for merits and promotions if there's evidence on paper that students are biased with their evaluations, right? And that are giving consistently to people with accents lower scores or, comments that are not so positive, then, that's something that perhaps, CAP should have in, keep in mind when they look at evaluations and merit and promotion packages. So that's
hey, Anna, you wanna work with me and we can try again. 6 or 7 years past, so perhaps now the environment changed a little bit because there has been some advances in the field of diversity. So.
Yeah, it would be like a little bit like consistent with that study from Subtirello that he was able to tease apart when it was a female faculty versus a male faculty, but also even the geographical location of the institution, right? In that case, here in the West Coast, students were more kind of accepting of the differences compared to the South, right? And again, the intersectionality that women were the ones that were having lower scores in general, so, you need to know, when we talk about code switching, is more broad than just the language. We need to speak with a different accent. We need to, I would say, be honest, every time that I need to be recorded, I flat my hair, right? Because I know, because, I don't want to have my own natural hair, right? Because, I don't want to be just for having a nappy hair. So, yeah, so it's a lot of different layers that we need to go in terms of code switching. That again, as Veronica mentioned, and also some studies have showed up, it drains, it's very taxing, especially for women, right? Because we need to accommodate so many different layers in order to perform according to the standard that the people perceive that should be the academic, the academic position.
Yeah, it's obvious that we are not perceived as smart people. We are not, by our co-workers, by the students, by other researchers. How many times I submit a papers and they tell me we have translating services, and I say thank you very much, but I speak English perfectly fine. Plus you just made 3 grammatical errors in your letter to me, by the way. It's like, really? So this is just, I guess that you get the translation services paragraph too. But yes, it's like, it's every day. It's every day. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if a study would go further with IRB. I mean, if the problem is the numbers, that the numbers are so small, doing, of course, many institutions, but at least UC-wide, and maybe the way the study is designed can be so that to appease the concerns of confidentiality, right?
I can try again, but if I tell you the truth, after resubmitting 3 times IRB, I was just so tired and so exhausted, and I wasn't taken seriously.
Yeah, but
you know, it's like I was like, so, but I can try again.
I don't see any of our campus
I mean, just to listen to Lillian
statisticians.
to talk about the problem.
Sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, that I don't see any of our campus statisticians in the audience, but I mean, if you wanted, we could look at at what you propose and run it by statisticians and see, okay, maybe this can be repackaged in this way that will not be of concern to the IRB, because
you want to work with me in that project, I can send you everything that I brought, the submission, resubmissions. It will be great because it needs to be done. Yes. It's enough. It's absolutely enough. You know, because you prepare your talk with your love, and then you arrive and you give them classes, and then they tell you the most asinine things. You're like, okay, thank you. So it's time to change the environment, because we have a limit, you know, that we can stand in our daily life. So I think that it's very important that we fight this.
Yeah, and I think that also goes in line that with the idea, you know, if we want to be involved in global efforts and multiculturalism, you know, we need to start at home, right? We need to start with our academic institution.
Yeah, we can be a leading institution in this topic. I mean, thanks to you, Lillian. And so, yep.
I see a comment from Titus in the chat. I mean, he's saying student evaluations have so many non-biases. It continues to surprise him that we use them. I mean, I agree with you. There's a lot of published literature on male-female bias, and that's true. But we still, I think it's the easy way, right, for CAP and for departments to vote. Look at the evaluation scores, and if someone doesn't have a 5, there's something seriously wrong with that person. And then the impact it has on us is that, okay, well, if you're not doing great in your evaluations, then it must be that class is not right for you. So they make you change classes, and all of a sudden you have a new prep and a new set of
more work. More work. Yeah. As an example, what I mentioned about that, the person that mentioned about this Colombian young faculty, that the senior faculty didn't want to promote her to associate professor because they didn't like her accent. You know, it comes to a personal like or dislike. It's like, you know, I don't like people that don't dress yellow or dress purple or blue. Who tells that that's not professional? You know, that there is no guide of how to dress you need to be decent and professional, but it doesn't have to be the like of everybody else, right? The particular style that someone has. The same goes with the accent, right?
The bad thing is when this happens, but you don't know why. You know, you don't get your promotion, you don't get your paper, you don't get your grant, and you don't know why. But it's because you are different. It's really it's really hurtful, you know.
Yeah, because going back to that,
the energy drains.
Yeah, going back to that person that told me about this other faculty member, you know, I even asked her, you know, what the students complain? Oh, everybody loves her. I said, but then what is the problem? You know, the students love the professor, but then it's the senior faculty that doesn't like her Colombian accent. You know, is very troublesome to know that you are among colleagues that don't like the way that you talk, you know, and they kind of don't see your competence just because they are blinded just by your accent.
There is a comment here from Lorena. She says, accent modification therapy sounds terrible.
Mhm.
It would be like linguistic version of gay conversion therapy. It's true. I'm so embarrassed that I took the therapy.
Yeah, and actually you
Didn't work,
mentioned
so we're okay.
going about that when in that one of the articles that I read about code switching, it mentions that also people from members from the LGBTQ community sometimes feel pressure, especially men, to sound more masculine when they're teaching or in a workplace settlement. So again, so if we're embracing diversity and queer inclusion, why does someone that is from the LGBTQ community needs to sound more masculine or look more masculine? There is no need for that. It's part of their identity, right?
Yeah.
So so it's obviously and I don't belong to that community, but I can feel what they feel when they say that they need to sound more masculine in order to be accepted.
Yeah.
Other comments, questions?
Let's see here in the chat.
I mean, if Titus is saying, feel free to unmute.
Yeah,
Wondering if
we have
a number of
I can
Latinx
ask.
students.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
I think we have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious if we have interest in increasing diversity in general at UCD enrollment, and then we have an increasing number of Latinx students here. I'm curious what kind of biases they bring in this area. I have no idea. I'm just curious if anybody knows.
Well, I could tell by my interaction with Latinx students. First, they usually appreciate having someone that look like them, but also they appreciate to have someone that sounds like them. I mentor in the group of graduate students of color, and they actually said that we don't see or we don't hear that often people like us. So they kind of appreciate that. That's obviously talking about Latinx to Latinx. But I don't remember them saying that, well, they have trouble understanding the Asian speaking sounding faculty, but at least I know that they probably put more effort precisely because they know that they could be judged because of how they sound. So I think that I think that at the end, I think that when the people put effort to do the code switching, they also acknowledge the effort that somebody else does in order to achieve code switching. As a personal example, I remember when I was a postdoc at WashU, some people that also were non-native speakers were asking me sometimes to help them putting together a PowerPoint presentation or a manuscript, and I would be like, I'm not a native speaker either. And they would say, yeah, but I know that you will not judge me, or I know that you will put the effort because you always help me. So I think that when there is that sense that we're all being judged, then you feel like a little bit more empathy and compassion in helping that other either student or faculty in that case. And there is someone raising the hand, but I don't see the person. Oh, it's Sama. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So hi, Lillian, nice talk.
Yep.
I missed the first part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can tell, I have an accent too, but different.
Everybody has an accent.
Not everyone.
Yep.
But actually, so I'm a PhD candidate at the Anatomy, Physiology and Cell Biology department. And I'm part of the teaching crew for the anatomy class. So I'm helping Lillian and I'm helping Dr. Gutierrez with the anatomy. So I've been teaching assistant for 4 years now. First year I was shaking literally because of my accent. I was so scared to start teaching people with English as a first language, and it's not 10 students or 20. They were 150 students. But actually, after I received my first evaluation, I was so happy about it because I thought they're gonna mention something about my accent, but actually it was opposite to that. They were appreciating my accent in a good way. And I continue to teach, and with teaching more and more, I think teaching helped me to improve my accent as well. I'm still scared to speak or teach with my accent, but it's encouraging now. Like with the evaluation I got, with the appreciation from the staff I'm helping, like you, I got so much confident about what I'm doing. And at the end of the day, I realized my accent is part of my identity. So I'm happy about it. Yeah. So, and thank you very much for your presentation today.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I found it very interesting, that is about identity. One of the things that I was reading is that some faculty of color also, they know that they have pressure to use a different accent when they're teaching or when they're presenting to their colleagues, but at the same time, they had that sense that I will be losing my identity. This is who I am, right? I'm from Colombia, or I'm from Peru, and why do I need to eradicate that from myself? Which is something that is part of who I am. Yeah, and that's a problem that we do have, with the code switching. It also comes to this dilemma of of identity and authenticity. You need to kind of portray a fake persona in order to achieve success, or at least to sound competent among your colleagues or students.
So it actually was like kind of breaking ice between me and student. So sometimes they ask, where are you from? So I have to say, I'm from Egypt. So we start getting to know each other more. So I think my accent helped me a little bit. Yeah. I used it in a good way, I think. I was fortunate.
This is good. Lillian, you mentioned before that not all the accents are the same. And some produce very negative reactions in the listener, but others don't. Perhaps your accent is a nice accent, classified as nice. Another accents are classified as detrimental. So that is interesting, the dichotomy between different accents, right? It's not the matter of having a different accent, but to having a different accent that is not interpreted like a cool accent.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly. It's not the accent itself, but it's the association that people attach to that accent.
Yeah, because for example, if they speak with a French accent, it's considered, like, wow, cute and elegant. But, if it's a Ave accent or a Bonix, no, that's a threat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the question of tying this to the increasing number of Latinx students is interesting, because the effect will necessarily change over time. A lot of the Latinx students that we have now are, I'd say, first generation, probably second generation, but mainly first generation. And as the time goes on, they will become second generation, and maybe they won't identify as Latinx eventually. So if they're first generation, they're hearing people like us in their homes. So they have that training to this accent, or to any accent. Like it would be interesting to have here people who study the brain from that point of view, from the linguistic point of view and linguistics itself. I think there's certain plasticity to kids who are raised in a bilingual family or trilingual family, or just listening to accents. So then they come to college, and if they heard whatever, Korean, Japanese, Spanish at home growing up, they hear professors with accents, and their brains habituate to the accent quickly, and they'll be more tolerant because they grew up in a community that was full of people who had an accent. Whereas the moment we go to families where that is not there, where they speak the mainstream language from their geographic location, that's when they come, they listen to someone like me, and immediately they're like, okay, the switch goes off in their brain. I cannot understand.
Yeah.
So that plasticity needs to be triggered somehow. So I wonder how that question that Titus posed will change over time. I mean, I agree that, I mean, right now with the increasing number of Latinx students, like we can see them in the classroom, they're appreciating to have someone with their background in some way in front of them, teaching them. Some of them, they had to undergo this code switching themselves to be able to get to college and to be able to enter a University of California. So the biases maybe are already there in that, okay, we need to speak well. So then maybe I'll judge this professor because why is this professor not speaking well? If to get here, we all need to speak, quote unquote, well. So I think it's a very complicated question, and it gives a lot of food for thought.
One thing that I noticed, Titus, is that when I give classes, I teach graduate courses, so there is not a lot of students. There are 20 at the most. The students with accents, they group together. Like I gave a class, so I teach the same that Lillian, she teaches in vet school, and I do like the graduate courses. And there was like one girl from Colombia, one girl from Mexico, one Chicana, and they were all sitting together. And then we were several professors. When they had to ask something, they would ask me because I have a similar accent. So this I had noticed. People with the same accents studying, students, I mean, I didn't measure it and I didn't do statistical analysis, okay? But it's just an observation. People with accents, they tend to group together, the students, and they tend to be closer to the professors who also have an accent. And I'm gonna tell you that many of these students are volunteering in my lab. So my lab is full of Hispanic students doing internships, and it's just because they feel closer to you. Right? And I think that maybe they feel that if they go to a person with a white accent, they are not going to be received in the same way that I receive them, because I feel for them. I know what they go through, you know? So this is just an observation.
Yeah. Titus, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So another question. So Lillian, I don't know if you've participated in the MMIs in the vet school.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're all oral exams.
Yeah.
So of course, and I think we collect pretty thorough statistics on who the interviewer is and who the student, what the student background is. That might be an alternate venue for getting access to data that we could look at internally.
Yeah,
that could address this.
I know that in the office with, Carl Andri, they have like a binder like this big of every year MMI. So they have, the ones that are kind of harder, when they're evaluating the students, the ones that are a little bit more tame or empathy, So yeah, so it would be interesting to take a look at that, how the diverse background between both, the evaluator, but also the student candidate plays a role there.
So maybe we can work in parallel. I can retake my project in the medical school and we can do it at the same time in the veterinary school, just to save work, Yeah. So this will be a good data to obtain. So one thing that I always have wondered is like, why the students are allowed to do pejorative comments to the professors? Like, I don't like it. I don't understand it. It should be somebody reading the comments and say, look, I'm sorry, but you are not allowed to insult your professor. Or she's not good. She should not be teaching. Why? I mean, give me a reason. You should not be allowed to insult your professor. But it happens, you receive comments that this day you go home and you are hurt. And you take your dinner and you feel the pain in your heart. Why I should go through that? they should not be allowed. They are an adult people like we are, you know? And I think that these people who treat like these other people should be accountable, and they should not be allowed to do that, because a professor will never, don't insult the students, you know, why the students can insult the professors. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We should be all respectful of each other.
Yeah, so that's why, as an example, that article that goes to at length about how to educate in the, you know, in the university, because, you know, it goes both ways. You know, we as professionals, we need to talk in a professional manner, etc. But the university should be their training ground. So if they don't learn the university, starting by how they talk to their professor or their classmates, what is going to happen at the workplace? You know, if we want to move the needle to be a more inclusive and equitable society, you know, the university is the place to learn that, right?
Yeah, and if you are hurt as a professor, the next day that you are gonna give your talk, you are not gonna have the energy to give a good talk.
Yeah,
because you are feeling attacked. How you can give your passion to the teaching if you are feeling that you are worthless and that you are being criticized? It's impossible, you know, and there is things that happen to you that is almost impossible to recover from. I think that we need to look for a solution, because it's really a big problem what we have here.
I agree.
yeah. So then we have another Q&A. You have there your hands up.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking, but I think it's probably not practical. It'd be great, since English has become such a universal language, but there's so many different accents, both as first language speakers from a variety of countries where English is actually a first language, but still not that comprehensible to someone who hasn't been exposed to those speakers, and ESL speakers in addition, that we should have some sort of ideally, there'd be required listening comprehension in English with people with all these different accents that students would have to be exposed to, because then they'd be ready to face the real global society right now, because English is becoming a major language with all these different accents that's used for global communications, like in aircraft, for example. There have been even some cases in aircraft where they did not understand properly the ground controllers, the flight controllers, air traffic controllers that were going on, that resulted in some near accidents and stuff like that happened from misunderstandings, although English is the standard language that's used. And that's an example that it is important for us to understand English with all its variety of accents, even domestic accents that exist here from inner cities and different areas that are just different than the sort of Midwestern white accent that is considered like the ideal broadcasting accent. So that'd be great if we could require that, but I don't think that would happen. And also, there's so many accents to get used to, but it'd be great for people to know how to do that and at least get some sort of incentive to do it, maybe extra credits, extra units, honors program like thing where they can learn English in its rich variety. Not to say that's the only language that they should know, because I know a variety of other languages also, of course, Spanish, French, German, they have all these regional accents too that are difficult for people to understand even when they're natives to those countries too. It's the same concept. But that'd be great for English speakers to know how to understand other people who are speaking English.
Yeah, because here in the US alone, we have about 32 different accents and dialects. So yeah, so, you know, like I remember I have family that live in New York City, as many Puerto Ricans do. So, you know, when you go there, you think that there will be just probably 5 accents, you know, Queens, Brooklyn, etc. But it happens that they have like 16 accents, because, you know, even in Brooklyn, you have the Yiddish from the Jewish background people that live in Brooklyn, in Bronx, and the Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans, the Chicano that lives in Bronx. So there are like 16 just in New York City. So, you know, so I know that it's problematic, but at the same time, it's part of being a multicultural environment. So to appreciate that richness that comes from having exposure to different accents, and appreciate the people for who they are, and not because they don't sound like me.
Well, with that, maybe this is a good time to break. We're past 4:30. Thank you so much. This was an amazing
Thank you.
conversation, and we should continue it. It's such an important.
Thank you, Lilia.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you for the great talk.
Yes,